This video looks at Poppies by Jane Weir, but asks, can we interpret it as something other than a war poem? So Jane Weir talks about there being many kinds of war, and here we're looking at a relationship between a mother and son. It's a specific relationship, but it's also archetypal. Archetypal means that it stands for a fundamental. So he's suggesting, that Jane Weir is suggesting that all mothers and sons have this kind of relationship. And the thing that they all have in common is that sons always leave. So in this reading, the poem is called Poppies not because he's leaving towards his death. His leaving is like a death. That's how she suffers grief from his going. And she associates this death with Armistice Sunday because it's 3 days before that he left her house, presumably for good. This is a poem that focuses on the individual. So she thinks not of all the victims of war, she's thinking of the individual, her son, who's not been killed, he's just left. This is a poem about you, and the you in the poem stands for all sons. What she describes around her now describes her own mental state. So the petals are crimped just like she is, confined by her grief. The paper is arranged to make a poppy, but it's in spasms, which asks us to imagine her sobbing or her pain. Similarly, she's been disrupted, just like the blockade of yellow bias has on her son's blazer. Interestingly, it's a blazer, not an army uniform, if we take this description. And so it's like a school uniform where she's sending him away. Perhaps he went to to a private school, and she's grieving for that loss. Certainly this kind of decoration around the blazer would suggest that it's not a normal school blazer and he has been packed off. Then the tragedy will be that she's chosen to send him to a private school, but that in doing so has lost her son. The person who comes back is not the son she sent away. He's been irrevocably changed. Perhaps this gap here suggests the future gap between mother and son. Here, the sellotape that's used to clean his uniform is not wrapped around her hand, it's bandaged, again conveying her pain, but also the fact that she's damaged herself by letting her son go. The white of the cat hair is symbolic perhaps of his innocence and also perhaps of her surrender to his leaving. Next, we find out that she's had to steel herself. When somebody steals themselves like this, they make themselves hard for the benefit that will ensue. And it seems to be that she's doing it to benefit her son, because if she softens her face, perhaps he'll regret going. So she's doing it in order to make him happy about going, in order to hide her distress from him. Even her term of affection, wanting to touch noses with her son's nose, is ironic here. The word graze also suggests a cut. The very thing that will bring them together is the same that's keeping them apart. And perhaps that's the mother's love. She knows she has to let him go because she loves him, but that's the very thing that hurts her most. And then in her mind's eye, she's returning to that innocent childhood where they played at being Eskimos. But of course, Eskimos are also isolated, living in far-flung communities, and cold. And perhaps that's an allusion to the future relationship mother and son will have because of his absence. This irony is also picked up in the description of the hair. Yes, it's literally gel, but when you gel something, you are together. But the opposite is happening here. They're being pulled apart. And the son's hair, prickly, is now like blackthorns. it's harsh on the hand, it's threatening. Even his body is telling her it wants to leave her. A very painful message for a mother to hear. She wants to respond in ways that will let him understand her grief, but she knows it's best not to do that, and so she flattens her words and rolls them and turns them into felt, as though she is compressing herself. Felt, of course, is as close as you can get to two-dimensional. It's a soft material, like a sheet, and so she has ceased to be a three-dimensional being now that her son is leaving. And the closer he gets to going, the more she retreats to a childlike state. So she imagines him opening the door to view his future, in this metaphor, the world overflowing, which then becomes a simile, like a treasure chest. Perhaps she's also suggesting that his childish faith in the future is misplaced. Life might not turn out to be a treasure chest, just as it's not for her having to say goodbye to her son. Or conversely, he is like the treasure in the chest, and having a child is a treasure chest in the future. And so we can view this as optimistic. She's happy for him to go, but devastated to lose him at the same time. Now she moves further into metaphor, perhaps as a way to try to understand her feelings here, because as we've seen, they're conflicted between grief and happiness. She imagines that he is now intoxicated, which is a similar idea. He is full of excitement and passion, but that could be viewed negatively, as drunkenness is. Similarly, when she releases the songbird from its cage, this is a metaphor for letting her son go, but it's also a metaphor for the sound of her grief. Perhaps she's crying out loud. Later, a single dove flew from the pear tree, and this word later suggests that she's looking back perhaps many months or even many years after that first departure, and they've still been parted. The pear signifies the pair of them, of course, and it's also a fruit, just as he is the fruit from her tree. But this metaphor is a bit more complex because he's also the single dove that has flown away. There's almost too much meaning in the metaphors that she's choosing, which for me reflects the fact that she has too much emotion for the parting of her son. It's affecting her more than she can bear. When she goes outside, it's also a symbolic act. She's going out without her clothes on. She's unprepared, and it also shows the near nakedness of how she feels in her grief to have lost her son as a physical presence. The last stanza is a bit more problematic for us if we're going to assume that this is not a war poem and the son is not dead. So let's give it a go. She's tracing the inscriptions on the war memorial. Well, yes, we could see that as her looking for her son's name, but actually the plural of inscriptions suggests not. She's mourning the loss of many sons, perhaps making a comparison between losing your son in war and losing your son in life. He's left home and he's not come back. Here, she's leaning against it like a wishbone. This is the kind of wish you make with a child. You know, the child pulls the wishbone with you, but here he's absent, and so the wishbone is never broken by the son. The wish is never made, and it can never be fulfilled. He's gone, and gone for good. Now, of course, he might physically come back. He might marry, have children, and visit, but it still fits the meaning of the poem. That young child who was perfect and adored his mother has gone forever. There are other complications in his life, and she's no longer the most important thing in it. And another metaphor which shows that is the dove pulling freely against the sky, desperate for freedom, desperate to pull away from her. The dove is also a symbol of peace, and so we can see that this leaving of home has been exactly the right thing for him. He's found peace, but the whole of the poem is about an absence of peace for the mother. She's left hoping, listening for that playground voice, again thinking about his childhood and wanting that child back rather than the adult he has become. So just to remind you, just like in my previous video, this is a poem that works with two different interpretations, but these interpretations exist simultaneously, like the image of the face and of the woman walking by between the trees. It is both a war poem and a poem about loss without war, just between a mother and child. So, if you would like more videos, don't forget to subscribe, and good luck in your exams.